literally what was set before Peter were items that according to the law of Torah, book of Leviticus, you can't eat this food. So let me back up a little bit. So in the beginning of chapter 10, what we see is the preparation of Cornelius to receive something that he's not aware of yet. It's just getting him ready. He's been praying. I told you the question we should ask for, what has he been praying for? What has he been praying for? So he's been praying. Angel comes and says, your prayers and your alms have now become a memorial before God, a testimony before God. So you have been heard. He doesn't yet know the outcome. He doesn't know what's going to happen. All right, so put that on hold. Same time he's praying, we have Peter praying. And now there's a vision that he sees preparing him for something. You see at the very end of this, he said, I have no clue. What was this whole vision experience for? I get it. You have told me 3 times, that I can eat this, that which is unclean. But what does that mean? So I'm glad to answer your point, I'm glad you brought this up. It didn't mean he's getting ready to go out and prepare him a meal of pork and rabbit and all the other stuff that they are forbidden. That was not the intent of the vision. But what the intent of the vision was to tell him that anything that I set before you, and if I say it's clean, I'm the high priest of heaven. You can't say to me that this is unclean because it's on the unclean list. Whether it's animal or people. That's where we're getting ready to go with it. All right? So, back to your point, present day, yes, there are still restrictions, dietary restrictions, if we abide by Levitical law. There's still dietary restrictions. But these dietary restrictions, as we would see later on in the New Testament, these are not the things that bring you into salvation. Right. They're actually, if we want to really be appropriate here, they are good health restrictions. They are things that will improve your health, but they do not lead to salvation. The reason God gave them, just a side note, the reason God gave these dietary restrictions was for at that time to identify or to separate his people from those who were not called to be his people. All right. It was a part of the things that would indicate those who are followers of Jehovah God because of their diet, because of their mannerisms, because several other things that were attributes of their religious faith. Now, what we are actually seeing here is how God is not trying to identify one single people group, but he's now, what we're seeing here in Acts chapter 10 is how he's bringing every people group together. So even when we talk about the dietary, there's no longer going to be an identification of you as being God's people based on your diet. Now, it's going to be based on what we've already established. Those who follow the what? No. What's the word we've been using? No. Who was Saul trying to destroy? The people of the what?
Christ.
Come on. I am the way. The way. The people of the way. All right. So I'm going to come back to the last statement here and button this and pull this together. Let's go back to chapter 10, verse 35. Chapter 10, verse 35. Verse 34 and verse 35. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of what? Persons. But in every what? Nation. That word nations is ethnos. In every nation, He that feareth him and worketh righteousness is what?
Accepted.
I just told you previously, under Levitical law, under the Old Testament, if you will, God identified his people based on various different symbols. Those who worship one God, those who follow certain dietary practices, those who follow the feast days, etc. Those were symbols, or those were identifiers or markers of people who follow Jehovah God. Now, what we're looking at, post-Messiah. Now what we're looking at is God is not a respecter of people groups. He's not, the truth is, and this is why it says, of a truth, God is no respecter of persons. He's what the interpretation here is, God's never only respected one people group. He chose one people group that he might reach all people. But here it's being clearly established that he's not a respecter of one single people group, but in every what? Nation. Anyone who believes or practices righteousness, they are part of the God family. Well, now we're about to specifically identify that the Gentiles, that's what Cornelius represents. And to use Cornelius in particular, so you got to see this. This is before the ministry of Paul, before he's going after, the folks in Corinth and Philippi and all those places. We start right there with the folks that were oppressing the people of God, the Romans, the ones who participated in the crucifixion of Christ, the Romans. You think you had a problem with Saul, who's a Jew, who was going out killing other Jews who followed the way. Now we're seeing the salvation of the Romans, who were the chief oppressors of the Jews. You know what it's going to sound like? It was already yesterday's news was, attention, Saul of Tarsus, the guy who was killing all the Jews, is now converted. And people say, no, that ain't true. And we're going to go back, we're going to see, he's going to get a whole lot of pushback. Can you imagine what's going to happen now? When a member of the Italian band, the Italian centurion, the Roman centurion, a soldier, is also being announced as one who is a devout man of God, who prays just like the Jews pray. And now we're about to see who is a part of the family of God, because the nation of the ethnicity of Gentiles, if you will, or the Gentiles are also a part of those who have access to to having a relationship with God, because he's no respecter of person.